man who is charged with murder has since been dubbed a serial killer due to the fact that he is now believed to be connected to another murder, and there are 3 others that he is suspected of. A Wisconsin sheriff has said, "We're dealing with what's possibly a serial killer. During his day, he's doing his deed to society and helping people and saving people. But there was a dark side to Chris Revac." While it's just now being discovered that this could have been a serial killer dating back decades ago, this is not something that we can ever get answers from this man ever again, due to the fact that he is no longer with us. And we'll explain the timeline for that, what actually happened, and the fact that he never really confessed to anything. That doesn't mean that the timelines don't add up and certain witnesses haven't come forward to claim that he in fact was the one responsible. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna, and I'm very grateful you are here. Our community really likes to focus on the victims and the survivors over the killers and the perpetrators. To us, that is way more important. So if that's something you would like to join us in doing, please subscribe down below. I also have a Genuine Gem newsletter where you can sign up so you never miss an upload. But first, a huge thank you to our sponsor, FlexiSpot. Let's be honest, most of us keep our beds for far longer than we should, yet a good bed is one of the most important investments of your health and your quality of sleep. So when I discovered the Japanese joinery bed frame from FlexiSpot, I instantly thought of my parents who have been sleeping on their same old bed for years. What makes this bed special is its unique Japanese joinery structure. Instead of relying on screws and bolts that will loosen over time, every piece connects through precision interlocking joints, creating a solid, stable frame that doesn't wobble or creak. It's strong, it's quiet, it's beautifully crafted like traditional woodworking art. Assembly could not be easier, and my parents can vouch for this. There were no tools, no hardware, just to slide and lock the pieces together. You will have the entire bed done in minutes. They also have Velcro secured slats that keep everything in place, while the recessed leg design allows the bed to sit flush against the wall, saving space and reducing noise. The frame is made of solid rubber wood, a durable hardwood that's both moisture and scratch resistant. It's built to last for years while maintaining that beautiful minimalistic look. And the best part, it's incredibly affordable for its quality. My parents cannot stop talking about how much sturdier and quieter the bed is compared to their old frame. They are very happy with it. It's a good looking bed that's easy to assemble, made from real wood and built to last without breaking the bank. You can check out my link below to experience the FlexiSpot Japanese joinery bed frame for yourself. And don't miss out, use our exclusive code for an instant discount and give your bedroom the upgrade that it deserves. Now let's get back to the story. So it was all the way back in 2006 in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and a 21-year-old named Deidre Harm was out with her friends that Saturday night on June 10th. She was just having a little bit of fun. Deidre was described as a free spirit. She was fun and bubbly, and she was the mother of a 4-month-old baby girl. So this is one of her first times out in months. She loved her daughter so much, and the baby's father was actually still in her life, but she wasn't living with him at the time. So she was living with one of her friends named Samantha that she knew from high school. They lived downtown in Wisconsin Rapids, and on June 10th, Deidre picked up the keys to her new complex. She was actually going to be moving away and having her own place at this time so that she could raise her daughter there. But that evening, she was going to go out with some of her friends and have a night to herself. She got a babysitter for her baby, and that was her father. So she very much trusted her babysitter, and she went downtown to a few different bars in the area, and that included Finish Line Bar, where she was having drinks with friends. They had a dance floor, and Deidre loved going out and just having a good time and dancing with all of her friends. But one of her friends decided to actually go home early, and she decided to stay a little bit longer, and that would be the last time anyone would see her alive. When she didn't make it to her apartment that night, nor did she make it to her father's house to pick up her daughter, her family instantly became anxious. She was not in her apartment when they went to search, and she failed to show up at Hardee's for her shift that next day, so they knew something was wrong. She was always very reliable when it came to work, so she was reported missing, and immediately the Wisconsin Rapids Police Department were taken aback because some of the officers there had actually seen Deidre that that night they were out at the bars having, a get together themselves, and they had seen her out dancing and having a good time, and they never saw anything suspicious, but they knew that she was there. They could not believe that something could have happened right under their noses if it happened while they were there, and she appeared fine when they last saw her. So the police questioned everyone who was there that night, including the daughter's father, of course, and the friend that she was originally there with that night. Friends that she was out with claimed that she had gone to see an unidentified male at another bar. And so they had actually walked over to the nearby New Body Shop Tavern. They were talking to another couple, but none of these friends knew who these individuals were that she was talking to. Everyone had alibis that checked out, and no one knew this man or this couple. Her friends began searching the area for her, and investigators were talking with the media trying to identify this man and have witnesses come forward on if they knew these people or in fact were these people. Bar staff remembered that a man was trailing Deidre and no one could identify this man. But composite sketches were made of the people who had seen him and they were shown to the public. There was another sketch of this man's alleged arm that had a tribal tattoo that was on the left arm that witnesses remembered, but that was about all of the information that they had moving forward. For the next 5 months, there were no answers in this disappearance, and that is when her mother, Gail, actually received a letter in the mail. This appeared to be written like a child. It allegedly read, "I'm so sorry about Deidre. I didn't mean to." Unfortunately, no fingerprints were found on this letter. And then on November 20th of 2006, a body was located 5 miles from the bar she was last seen at. 2 hunters were in this wooded area when they found Deidre Harm. This area was off Marsh Road, and it was actually known as Blueberry Ridge for its remote area that had trash sort of dumped all over the place. Teens would often party there, they would mud there and goof around, and police knew this because they were often called for underage parties at night. There was also a locked gate around the area that of course had been broken into, and you could get through. There was a spot to walk around, but it definitely was not big enough for any cars to pass through. The community was so small that when they heard that the police found something, many of Deidre's friends actually arrived at the crime scene to realize that their friend had been killed. Deidre's bones displayed trauma. They were separated throughout the marsh, and her cause of death was undetermined. They found no struggle at the scene, so it was believed that she had just been dumped there and killed elsewhere. None of her clothes were actually found, and there were only 2 rings nearby that were determined to be Deidre's. This was determined to be a homicide investigation, and her mother, Gail, said that her life was turned upside down. All she had was Deidre. But there was hardly any evidence to solve this case. No one came forward, very few tips were given, and the whole town became suspicious of everyone who lived there. A few suspects were interviewed, including a drug dealer that Deidre allegedly bought drugs from before, but upon further investigation, no suspects became persons of interest, and the case went cold. Little did Wisconsin investigators know that a year after this, another woman vanished. This was in Ava, Missouri. 36-year-old Renee Williams was last seen on March 13th of 2007. Renee worked at the Eagles Lodge on Highway 14 in Ava, Missouri. She had been working all evening as a bartender, and around 1:30 in the morning, she had put the receipts in the safe. She was closing up, and she called her boyfriend, Tim Brooke, to let him know that she was on her way home. She did this every single night. Of course, doing the night shift kind of freaked her out, and so Renee was known to be this devoted girlfriend of 13 years to Tim and the mom of their 3 young children. She loved her job, her life was going well, she was said to be full of fun and laughter. Tim worked during the day so Renee could work at night, and they switched off watching the kids. She didn't really love working by herself at night because she just wished that someone would be there when she had to close up. You see, self-service at this bar was a bit inconsistent, and there were no windows to actually see outside when you were walking outside the parking lot from the bar area. So you were basically going into the dark with only one light. And this lamppost is actually where she parked her car, so it was in the light. But that night after her shift, she never made it home, and no one knew why. The bar was locked up. Renee had done her closing duties, but it appeared as though she had not made it to the car that was right outside the bar. You see, Renee was this Caucasian female with blonde hair, blue eyes. She had her tongue and ears pierced, and one of her lower front teeth was missing. She was born with reverse club feet and had surgery to correct this. She had tattoos consisting of the letters KSA on her left fingers and a unicorn head on her right ankle, as well as 2 feathers on her right arm. When no one was able to get a hold of Renee, both her boyfriend and her kids knew something happened. She was always there for them in the mornings, especially before they went to school. So Tim decided to head to the bar to find her, and he would find that her car was still in the parking lot. It was locked, and so were the bar doors. He found a few drops of blood on the sidewalk where her car was parked, but no sign of anyone around. So he immediately called the police from there, and they theorized that it could be a robbery due to her, of course, doing the closing shifts, which involved handling the money. So they went inside this bar, but the money had been safely placed into the safe before she left. So they took the blood that was outside and they went to test it. But this was not Renee. It actually belonged to a male not in the database. So the first suspect was obviously her boyfriend, Tim, but the phone records provided him an alibi. He was home that entire night. That night she was wearing a blue hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, sneakers, and 3 gold rings, carrying a brown purse and her cell phone. The whole community came together to search. They all knew bartender Renee, and they knew that she would want to be home with her kids. She would not have just left on purpose. So a week later, when she remained missing, officers actually brought in cadaver dogs to search the area around the lodge. They tracked her scent from the bar to about 1.5 miles down the road to an abandoned barn. That's where the dog said the scent stopped. Now, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department announced that they were likely looking for a body. But inside of that barn, it was empty. There was no Renee. But her sister, Shawnee, said that at that point, she could feel that her sister was no longer there. They were told that if the cadaver dogs couldn't smell her anymore after the barn, that it was likely because she was wrapped up and already deceased when she was taken out of the barn. Her family tried to have hope that she was okay, but they all did have to go back to regular life, to work and to school. Meanwhile, investigators began interrogating everyone who worked at the Eagles Lodge and had been there that day. They had their suspicions, but they really had no evidence. In fact, there was a tip sent in about a man who they had spoken to. He confirmed he was there that night and kept staring at the missing persons poster that the officer had brought with him. He also had a smashed finger, and he said it was from his pickup door because he smashed it when he was trying to leave the bar. But the officer said that when talking to this man, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. So a month later, they actually got a search warrant for this man's home. And that's when they found clothing that appeared to have blood on them. And when they were taken in for analysis, the DNA matched Renee Williams. But the amount of blood was relatively small and there was no body. No arrests were made, yet another disappearance that went cold. Investigators found that she had no activity on bank accounts or her social security number. However, 2 years later, the case was reopened. And in 2009, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department announced that they believed they were close to finding her body. They had received a tip connected to Renee Williams' disappearance that led them to an undisclosed location. They were led to a property outside of Douglas County and they excavated the land. No body was located, however, they claimed they found several items of interest. Now, the man that they had previously spoken to and had searched his home and found the blood in, they actually would take another route. Instead of speaking to him, they would try to speak to his wife, Joanna. And this woman actually worked as a dispatcher for the police department, so they did know her quite well. So they thought maybe she would be more open with them. And she had much more to say than her husband did. You see, Joanna admitted to one of the officers that her husband had come home from work one night, the night of Renee's disappearance around 4 a.m., with a wound on his hand. Then in a 26-page letter that was handwritten, Joanna described the pressure and the fear her husband had given her that led to her helping him bury a woman. She told authorities that she came across a body connected to a homicide in the area and that her husband told her that it was an accident. He said he met this woman at the bar and was going to bring her home for a threesome, but there was an argument and he choked her until she stopped breathing. She said her husband put the body in the woods near their home, and then 4 days later, she helped to move it.
He told her he needed her to help her on the hill behind their house. He went up there. He went up there. She went up. At that time, she seen Renee Williams actually lying on the ground, deceased. She took off running. He caught her, basically threatened to kill her mom and her sister if she didn't help load Renee into the vehicle.
She said this is why the police were able to find the DNA evidence in the vehicle of Renee Williams. Joanna tried to take them to the location of this body where they had buried it, her and her husband, but she was unable to find Renee Williams. So on July 25th of 2009, over 2 years since her disappearance, an arrest was made. A man named Christopher Revac was arrested on suspicion of murder. He showed no emotion as he was taken outside of his home, and the tip that they had gotten 2 years ago was about this man, stating that he was acting strange the night of Renee's disappearance. The police knew his wife Joanna, but they didn't really know Chris. However, the people at the lodge did. He was a frequent visitor of the bar, specifically when Renee was there. When they had searched his home, they were just gathering evidence so that they could compile a full case against him.
Chris Revac was my suspect from the very beginning. I went over the case file that was here, and there were some other people of interest that they had interviewed and went a different direction. And I kind of looked at them and went and tried to rule them out as suspects, and everything kept coming back to Revac. Obviously, she hadn't left willing. I mean, there was blood at the scene. So Chris Revac was actually a person of interest kind of right in the very beginning. I know the previous sheriff had served a search warrant on his vehicle, actually sent investigators to his house just days after the disappearance. As a matter of fact, the day after. He had an injury to his thumb. He played that off that he'd slammed it in the car door. He had buried something around the French drains in their house about that time. So we dug the French drains up around the house, and she had a tip jar that she took with her to work, or she had at work, and she'd take it with her every night. We found all the change. The next day I went in to talk to him and interview him. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to say nothing. I gave him the warrant.
But while they were doing that, it was discovered that Chris had a report made against him by another bartender a year before at the same bar when she was trying to close. He tried to attack her, but there was a male who was still working and helped to fend him off. This was against Chris Revac. This originally was not reported, but the survivor came forward after Renee vanished, since this was such a similar circumstance. So they believe that Renee was not his first victim, but they would later find out that she likely wasn't his second victim either. Chris Revac was a local 36-year-old man who had been a person of interest since the beginning. You see, Christopher was at the bar that night. He was a regular, but they had no evidence against him. Now they had his DNA, which was a match to the DNA taken from the crime scene that turned out to be belonging to a male, as well as Renee's DNA, which was blood and saliva found at his residence. So they felt like they had enough evidence to charge him, and Christopher was found to have moved to Missouri in 2000, and he worked as an EMT for the last 6 years in the nearby Taney County. No one believed that he was responsible for murder, and he also wasn't talking. Investigators wouldn't have a chance to force information out of him either, considering he would take his own life the next day. He was on watch, and yet during one of their breaks where they were switching guards, in 5 minutes he took his life. And Renee's family was devastated. They were left with no answers and no body. And the Douglas County Sheriff's Office promised to have answers as they searched an 80-acre field nearby his home. They were also investigating his background and other possible crimes, though Christopher did not seem to have a criminal record. But his wife Joanna had much more to say. Just 4 days after Christopher was found in his cell, the Douglas County Sheriff, Chris DeGassi, called the Wisconsin Rapids Police Department to speak to them about any disappearances that they could have unsolved from the dates of June 3rd to June 26th of 2006, so a year prior to Renee's murder. They believe that Christopher Revac might have killed someone there as well. You see, Christopher's wife told the officers that they got married in December 2006 and that prior to that they had taken several trips to Wisconsin. One was from June 3rd to June 16th when they took Christopher's daughter to visit family there. So Christopher had connections in Wisconsin. He had grown up there, gone to high school there, and the couple took their kids to see Christopher's sister graduate high school. So Christopher's wife, Joanna, stated that Christopher went out by himself one night and they were in Wisconsin Rapids, and he didn't get home until about 5 a.m. When he did, his clothes were muddy. He explained that he got his truck stuck in the mud and had to dig himself out by hand. She said he washed his clothes at least twice and that his truck was muddy. This was about the time that Deidre Harm vanished. She said Christopher had a bad temper with aggression when he started drinking. But his wife was not the only one who believed that he could be connected to Deidre Harm's murder. His own brother Jason came forward in August of 2009 to talk about his brother. He said that Chris changed in high school. He wasn't well liked. He started being confrontational and fight while drinking, and that the two brothers' relationship were pretty distant since he moved to Missouri. But Jason said that on June 10th, the night Deidre Harm vanished, he went out drinking with Chris around 9:30 at the Finish Line bar. Chris left several times to go hang out with a friend from high school named Brent. They would go to the Four Stools bar, and so Chris was just kind of going back and forth between Jason and Brent, bar hopping with them. Jason said that he saw his brother dancing with a woman who was not his fiancée, and so he got into a fight with Christopher because of this, and they ended up going back home at around 12:30. But Christopher then decided to go back out alone, and when he came back home, he was covered in mud. He had put his clothes on from the day before, and his fiancée Joanna, who was sleeping in that room when he came in, she was sleeping on the floor next to his daughters, she said that he was filthy, and she found it odd that he then went to wash his own clothes when she always did that for him. Also that day when he had returned after just going missing and coming back muddy, he insisted that they go out four-wheeling right away. And Jason noticed that the inside of his truck was spotless when the day before it had been covered in trash. When they got to the ATV park, Chris only was said to do one lap before he got sick and he just left. Then he went home to ask his fiancée, Joanna, to cut his hair. And then he said he wanted to go and retake all of the photos they had taken the day prior with his new haircut. He, in fact, made his sister put back on her cap and gown to take photos of him with a shaved head. Then he was said to accidentally delete the original ones. Later that day, they unexpectedly left to go back to Missouri, and even his mom was upset because that was not the original plan. A witness who had been out with Deidre that night when she vanished and saw her with an unknown man was shown a photo of Christopher at this time, and she was 100% sure that that was the guy. Now, Christopher had grown up in the Wisconsin Rapids area, and his high school friends stated that they knew exactly where Deidre's body was located when it was found because that's a place that they often went as teens, the area known as Blueberry. But investigators knew that Chris's truck that he had would not have fit through that gate to dump Deidre's body there until they realized that every single time he would come back to Wisconsin, he would bring his four-wheeler in the back of his truck, just like he did that time. That four-wheeler was owned now by his brother since he had taken his life, and so investigators were able to measure the four-wheeler, and they discovered that it would fit if the gate was lifted. The four-wheeler was also allegedly seen downtown the night Deidre was out. As far as the sketches, the composite sketches from witnesses way back when Deidre vanished, many believed that Chris looked like the sketch in the face, except for the fact that the sketch had this shaggy hair. And when Chris was looked into, he had a buzz cut. However, that now made sense if Joanna had shaved his head the next day because he asked her to. However, when it came to the other sketch of the arm with the tribal tattoo, Christopher was said not to have any. But Christopher's brother Jason claimed that the night that they went out, Chris was also hanging out with his high school friend Brent, and Brent had a tribal tattoo on his arm, but it was the right arm and not the left like in the sketch. Police did confirm that Christopher met up with Brent and his girlfriend that night, and they went to several bars. They allegedly spoke to Brent and eliminated him as a suspect in Deidre's murder. Brent said he last saw Chris around 11 p.m. when Jason and Chris went home. So it didn't appear that anyone knew of what he was doing after he went back out. Then came the timeline specifics, because Chris had actually taken off of work for vacation from June 6th, 2006 to June 12th. And then on the 13th and the 14th, he wrote in that he was still going to be in Wisconsin with his family. When Joanna was actually brought in to be questioned after giving this statement, she was shown all of the evidence and she agreed that there were just too many coincidences and she felt responsible. But she didn't say what for. She said that Chris had a Jekyll and Hyde-like personality when he was drinking, and she just kind of left it at that.
I just Google searched the places that he had lived. So I'd ran a comprehensive report on him that showed everywhere he had lived. That there was some type of documentation, whether it be through an electric bill, a driver's license. One of the places that it showed was Wisconsin Rapids. I Google searched women abducted from bars in Wisconsin Rapids, and lo and behold, the first thing that popped up was Deidre Harm and a composite drawing that looked to me identical to be Chris Revac. I believe the guy is a serial killer. He's killed one in my county. He killed one in Wisconsin Rapids, and now we're seeing that he has some connection to Mason City, Iowa. So
now, Sheriff Sean Becker stated that they were still looking for more information, but there was no doubt in his mind that Chris Revac did this to Deidre and that nothing was going to change his mind to say that he didn't. Both Jason and Joanna had allegedly stopped cooperating with investigators in the years since, and Sheriff Becker believes that Joanna is protecting something that they have not figured out yet. Now, Deidre's mother, Gail, believes that Chris Revac is her daughter's killer.
When you have a case like this where somebody lost their life at the hands of somebody else, don't forget it. You want to see it through.
But the Missouri Douglas County Sheriff Chris DeGassi began to theorize that this Christopher Revac could have kidnapped and murdered even more women, that he lived a double life. He was calling him a suspected serial killer. He began searching for old cases and missing women of the places that he had frequented.
He was a paramedic by day and essentially a murderer by night.
So Sheriff DeGassi announced that Christopher was also a possible person of interest in the 1995 unsolved murder in Iowa as well. Sheriff DeGassi reached out to investigators in Iowa. This was about the 27-year-old Jody Huizentrout, who was the TV news anchor, and her disappearance is very well known in the true crime space. But this investigator believed that there was a possible link to this man that he believed was a serial killer. If you don't know, Jody was living in Mason City, Iowa in 1995. She was a very popular news anchor. Everybody loved her, but she overslept her alarm that day. She needed to be at the station bright and early, and it was already 4 a.m. on June 2017. She woke up to a call from her coworker saying she was going to be in as soon as possible. She never made it, though, and this was so unlike her. In fact, she was never seen again. Her car was still outside the apartment, and her red-heeled shoes and a bent key was found nearby. Neighbors reported hearing a scream that morning. Now, there are many persons of interest and suspects in Jody's case from the decades of investigation, but none have been arrested. There was a man named John Van Cise, and he was allegedly a friend of Jody's and was reportedly the last person who saw her alive the night prior at his duplex, where they were watching a film of a birthday party together, where they were both in this film. So he was the prime suspect for quite a long time in many eyes. But it was discovered that on the other side of this duplex, where John Van Cise lived, was where Chris Revac's girlfriend lived at that same time in 1995. You see, Chris's girlfriend at that time, Jennifer, had moved there after they had actually broken up, but she had moved out 3 months prior to Jody's abduction. Investigators were theorizing that maybe Christopher was stalking his ex-girlfriend when she did live there, and possibly she had moved out without him knowing that. His girlfriend even pondered that he would have been trying to track her down. So officers theorized that maybe while doing so, he noticed Jody next door. She was always hanging out at John's place, and they were said to be very good friends. Now, Chris was 23 years old at this time, and his exact location during Jody's disappearance is unknown. Jody's body has never been found, just like Renee's, and how odd for a alleged serial killer's girlfriend to be living next door to where a missing woman was last seen, allegedly, and never found again. So the Iowa and Wisconsin investigators met up in 2024 to re-examine the possible connection of these cases, and it turned out that Rivak had actually been a person of interest, but his link was dismissed back in 2009 by the police. Sheriff DeGassi, who worked on the Missouri disappearance of Renee Williams, said just this year,
He had a girlfriend that lived right around the corner from Jody. And, that's the only connection we have to it. But hey, I've done this for 32 years, and I don't believe in coincidence. I don't believe you have a guy that's a serial killer that lives in Ava, Missouri, and commits a murder. He kills Deidre Harm in Wisconsin Rapids, and now we have a place where he was at, and right next door to where his girlfriend was at, we have another person that was murdered.
Jody was in fact declared dead in 2001. But the Mason City, Iowa police captain Mike McClevey clarified, nothing has been found that shows Christopher Rivak was in Mason City around the time Jody Huisentruit was abducted, but he remains on a list of persons of interest in her unsolved case. So while some truly believe that since there's never been another arrest, that Chris Rivak could be the person responsible for Jody's disappearance. But as far as the other suspects, John Van Sice, the friend who had last seen her, and the other suspect, he went to the grave maintaining his innocence. He was a seed salesman who was 22 years older than Jody, who went to bars and was often this bachelor type life. He had a boat that Jody went out on with him to water ski. Jody said that he was just a nice guy and they were friends, but he also did name his boat after her. The morning Jody vanished, John had called the news station to ask about her, but she wasn't there yet. He became the first person of interest in Jody's abduction. He continued to call her work to ask about updates in her case. He also spoke to the news and talked about her in the past tense. There was a grand jury indictment against him in 2017, but no charges were made, and then in 2024, he passed away. Another suspect was Brad Millerburn, whose ex-wife believed that he could have done this. She had been best friends with Jody back then, and they divorced on June 23rd of 1995. And then Jody vanished 4 days later. He had called his ex-wife on the 10th anniversary of Jody's disappearance to remind her that it was the 10th anniversary. That was the one and only time that they had spoken since they divorced. She also said that he had a drinking problem, he would get very angry, and he matched a composite sketch that was made of a man who was seen lurking outside of Jody's apartment complex a few days prior to her vanishing. But again, there was no physical evidence against him. And he also agreed to take a polygraph test. There was also the suspect who was a serial rapist named Tony Jackson, who was later caught for 4 kidnappings and SA, and he lived in Mason City, Iowa, when Jody vanished. He also lived a block away from Jody's radio station, and his ex-girlfriend claimed that he was violent. The 4 rapes that he was convicted of occurred 2 years after Jody vanished, and he allegedly told an inmate that he had killed an anchor woman, and then he made up a rap that she could be found in Tiffin, Iowa. But in 1999, he was officially cleared of any relation to the case, and he denied any connection to Jody. So no one has ever been arrested or charged in Jody's disappearance, including Christopher Rivak. This year, on October 25, the Wisconsin District Attorney Jonathan Barnett announced that he had reviewed reports from law enforcement regarding the connection of Christopher Rivak to the death of Deidre Harm, and agreed that there was finally enough evidence to charge him with the murder if he was still alive. Basically, he considers this case closed and that Christopher Rivak is in fact the killer of Deidre Harm. Deidre's family stated, "You did not just take a life, you shattered countless others." Christopher's wife, Joanna, has since remarried, moved to Michigan, and hasn't spoke to anyone since. So Christopher Rivak has now been connected to the disappearance of Renee Williams, the murder of Deidre Harm, and is a person of interest in Jody Huisentruit's disappearance. There are also 2 other murders that he is believed to have possibly been linked to, one in Madison, Wisconsin, and one in Dubuque, Iowa. But that is why investigators suspect that Rivak is connected to 5 homicides within 15 years. Do you believe that Jody visiting the place that was right next door to Christopher's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend at the time was just a coincidence? Is this man a serial killer? I do understand how investigators could come to this conclusion, considering that he was able to murder in 2 different places where he had connections to, even though it took quite a long time for them to actually be connected. And so if he also did have ties to Iowa, that's concerning as well. You know, many people stated in the Renee Williams case that they did not believe that that was the killer's first kill. And also in Deidre Harm's case, they did not believe that either. So if that's the case, then there might have been others prior to that. And how many more? I don't know if we'll ever know. Do you think that when he was caught for Renee Williams' murder, that he took his life knowing that they were just going to be able to dig deeper and deeper and realize what he had really done, how many he had really harmed, and the fact that he was a serial killer? Or do you think that he had possibly killed just Renee, and that alone, and him being caught, he just didn't want to deal with the consequences? I can't imagine how infuriating it is for Renee and Deidre's families to know that likely this man did take their loved one's life, but he took the cowardly way out, and now they don't get the justice that they deserve. And if there are more victims, the fact that he went ahead and went out in silence and didn't give closure to those families. How many more victims do you think this man could have? I don't know if he is connected to Jodi's case. I think there have been a lot of people who have just been kind of thrown out there, and I'm sure that that's very exhausting for her family and friends. But I think a lot of people just want to know what happened to this sweet woman. Obviously, something very violent happened to her that morning. But I think the real question everybody wants to know is why. And it is hard to get past the fact that a possible serial killer had just been dating the woman who lived next door to the man she was always hanging out with. Is that just a random coincidence? Do you believe in coincidences? Or is that all the proof that you need to believe that he's the killer? Please let me know all of your thoughts on this. And I do want to shout out the documentary, The Last Broadcast, which was about Jodi's disappearance and her life and her impact and the investigation into all of that. And it talks a bit about Christopher Rivac and everything that he could have possibly done. But let me know down below, is this a serial killer that we did not catch prior to him taking his life? Did he kill 2, which is still horrific? 3? 5? More than that? An investigator in that documentary stated that somebody out there knows whether that is a person who did it and is still alive, or whether it is the killer's family member that is still alive and lives with this secret. And so they believe that whether in Jodi's case, whether in Christopher Rivac's cases, there is somebody who knows the truth, and all they need is for them to come forward. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I truly appreciate you, and don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.